Open with the moment your son told you those words. Express the pain and disbelief of being judged by your own child. Highlight the emotional weight of being excluded from such a significant event. I never thought I'd hear those words from my own child. I raised this boy. I held his hand when he was scared of the dark. I sat next to him through every scraped knee, every fever, every heartbreak. And yet, one day, in a moment that was supposed to be filled with joy and family and celebration, he looked me in the eye and said, "I don't want you at the wedding. You'll embarrass me. You're too ugly." Now, I don't care how thick your skin is, nothing prepares you for that. It doesn't just knock the wind out of you. It takes something deeper. Something rooted in your bones. This wasn't some stranger making a passing comment on the street. This was the baby I raised with trembling hands and a heart that beat out of my chest every time he needed me. This was the boy I would have taken a bullet for without a second thought. And in that moment, he reduced me to something less than human. He made me feel like a mistake that had to be hidden away. I stood there stunned. My mouth opened but nothing came out. Because there was no comeback, no witty line, no self-help mantra that could dull the sting of that sentence. Too ugly for his wedding. It wasn't about my face. It wasn't about wrinkles or weight or whatever insecurity I'd battled quietly in the mirror over the years. It was about worth. It was about the idea that after everything I'd poured into this boy's life, time, love, energy, years of doing without so he could have more, after all that I was still disposable. Still shameful. Still something to hide. Let me tell you something. No mother ever imagines she'll be measured like that. Not by the color of her dress or the warmth of her smile, but by the shape of her face. No parent pictures being left off the guest list because their love wasn't beautiful enough. I didn't know whether to scream or cry or walk away and never look back. And for a second I did nothing. Because I was frozen between heartbreak and disbelief. But here's what hit me later. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. You don't just wake up one day and decide your mother is too ugly to stand beside you. That mindset is fed over time. It's shaped by a culture that tells you over and over that appearances are currency, that love has conditions, and that image matters more than substance. I raised a son in that world. I raised a boy who once clung to me for safety, and somewhere along the way, the world taught him that my face was a flaw. And maybe, just maybe, I enabled it too. By always putting myself last. By hiding my tiredness behind a smile. By shrinking myself, apologizing for how I looked, how I aged, how I existed. That's the thing about motherhood. You give and you give and you give, and if you're not careful, you disappear in the process. Until one day, someone you love looks at you and doesn't see a person anymore. They see something to be corrected, improved, edited out of the picture. And yet, I didn't scream at him. I didn't lash out. I just stood there, looking at this grown man I'd raised, and I realized something that still breaks my heart. He didn't know me anymore. Not really. He knew the version of me that showed up when he needed her, who patched up his wounds and made things happen behind the scenes. But he didn't know the woman. He didn't see the strength it took to show up every single day. He didn't see the beauty in that kind of love. That was the moment I understood this wasn't just about me. This was about every woman who's been told she's not enough because of the way she looks. Every mother who's become invisible the moment her kids grew up. Every parent who's been pushed aside once they were no longer convenient or presentable. So I didn't try to convince him. I didn't beg to be seen. I didn't argue my worth. Because my value isn't up for debate. Not anymore. "You don't want me there," said. "Okay." And I meant it. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not fight to be included, but to walk away with your head high, knowing that someone else's shame is not your burden to carry. You know what's funny? People look at a single moment, like the one where my son told me I was too ugly to come to his wedding, and they think that's the story. They think that is the moment that matters. But it's not. That sentence, as cruel and unforgettable as it was, didn't come out of nowhere. It landed on top of a mountain I had built, stone by stone, for decades. And every one of those stones was a sacrifice. A part of me I gave up without hesitation because I loved him. When you're a parent, you sign up for something sacred, whether you realize it or not. You sign up to put someone else's needs above your own for years. And I don't mean just driving them to practice or making sure there's dinner on the table. I mean showing up on the days when your body is aching and your soul is running on empty. I mean holding your breath when they walk into situations you can't protect them from. I mean handing over your heart fully and without condition, and knowing they may never understand what it cost you to love them that hard. I remember nights when he was sick and I would sleep upright in a chair just so I could keep a hand on his back. Times I skipped meals so he could have what he needed. I remember Christmases where the only gifts under the tree were the ones with his name on them. I remember lying to people about how things were going because I didn't want anyone to think less of my son, even when he was breaking my heart a little bit at a time. And I did it all without keeping score. Because that's what love is, right? Real love doesn't count the cost. But here's the truth nobody likes to talk about. Even unconditional love leaves a mark. You can give everything, your time, your youth, your energy, and still end up being seen as disposable. You can pour your whole soul into someone and they'll forget to say thank you. Or worse, they'll look you in the eye one day and tell you you're not good enough to be part of the biggest moment of their life. And when that happens, when someone you've carried through hell and back decides you're no longer worthy of being seen, it shakes everything. Makes you question your memory, your choices, your worth. You start to wonder, was I a fool for loving this hard? Did I get it wrong? But I want to tell you something that took me a long time to say out loud. No, I wasn't a fool. I didn't get it wrong. I was a mother. I was a human being who loved fully and gave without expectation. And that is never something to be ashamed of. See, people want to talk about success and appearances and who's sitting at the head table. But nobody wants to talk about the woman who worked 2 jobs so her son could go to college. Nobody writes speeches for the mom who sold her jewelry to keep the lights on. Nobody claps for the invisible sacrifices made in silence. But those are the moments that build a life. Those are the moments that built his life. So no, I didn't get it wrong. I just got tired. Tired of shrinking myself. Tired of pretending that being erased by someone I raised was okay. Tired of smiling through the heartbreak and pretending it didn't cut deep. Because here's what I realized. My love had value, even if it wasn't acknowledged. My sacrifices mattered, even if they were ignored. I didn't need a seat at a wedding to prove my worth. That boy stood tall in a suit that was paid for by the years I spent bending over backwards to keep him steady. And he may not have seen me, but every step he took down that aisle was built on a foundation I laid. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Maybe my power isn't in being seen. Maybe it's in knowing the truth and standing in it without apology. I carried him in my body. I carried him in my arms. And for years I carried him in my decisions, my fears, my hopes. But the day he told me I was too ugly to be part of his story, that was the day I stopped carrying his shame. I kept turning those words over in my head. You're too ugly for my wedding. Over and over like a broken record. And somewhere between the shock and the heartbreak, another question started creeping in. Where did he learn that? Where did my son, my own flesh and blood, get the idea that someone's appearance could override a lifetime of love? That being seen with me would somehow stain his perfect day. That shame could be stronger than connection. That didn't come from nowhere. It came from a world that tells us every single day that beauty is a currency. And if you don't have it, you're bankrupt. Came from movies, social media, advertising, everything that screams at us. You are only as valuable as you are attractive. And I don't mean attractive like confidence or kindness. I mean attractive like filtered, smooth, thin, unwrinkled, curated, perfect. We're bombarded with these images constantly. Women especially, but men too. We get told what's desirable and what's unacceptable. What should be shown off and what should be hidden. And slowly, without even realizing it, we start measuring the people in our lives by those standards. Not by how they make us feel. Not by what they've given us. But by how they look in a photo. I don't think my son was born with that mindset. He wasn't born looking at my face with judgment. When he was little, he used to trace the lines on my cheeks and ask if they were from smiling too much. He used to kiss my forehead and tell me I smelled like home. That child didn't see ugly. He saw love. He saw safety. He saw someone who showed up for him. But somewhere along the way, the world told him to stop looking with his heart, to start looking with the lens of comparison, of criticism, of shame. And that's what breaks me. Not just what he said, but the fact that I wasn't even surprised. Because we've all felt it, haven't we? That pressure to hide the parts of ourselves that don't fit the mold. To filter our photos. To stay quiet when we feel too much. Play small. We've learned that being real, really real, isn't welcome. So we shave ourselves down to something acceptable. And in doing that, we start seeing others the same way. We reduce people to checkboxes. Attractive enough. Thin enough. Young enough. And we forget the soul that's standing right in front of us. I was standing there trying to hold back tears while my son, the boy I had once held against my chest, who I'd rocked through colic and bad dreams and growing pains, was telling me I didn't look right to be part of his celebration. And I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who's been told to age gracefully, but not too visibly. To show up but not take up space. To love unconditionally, but not expect to be loved through her own imperfections. Made me angry. Not at him. Not entirely. But at this system that raises boys to be ashamed of their mothers the minute they stop being shiny. At this lie that says beauty is a performance, and the people who've lived the longest, who've carried the most, somehow matter the least. I thought about how many women I know who stay behind the camera, who apologize before speaking, who hesitate before walking into a room, because they've been taught to be embarrassed by their own reflection. And I decided I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not dimming myself down so someone else can feel comfortable in their curated image of perfection. I'm not hiding my face or my story, or the years that gave me every single line on my skin. I earned those lines. I earned this body. I earned the right to be seen. And if he couldn't see me, really see me, then maybe the pain wasn't just in being excluded. Maybe the real loss was his. He missed the chance to have someone in his corner who would have loved him no matter how many mistakes he made. He traded that for a photo op. The next time someone tells you you're not enough, not beautiful enough, not thin enough, not young enough, I want you to remember this. You were never supposed to fit into their frame. You were meant to stand in your own light. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step out of their picture and say, I refuse to be cropped out of my own life. There's a moment in every story where something shifts. Where heartbreak stops echoing and starts turning into resolve. That moment came for me the second I walked out of his house. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't try to change his mind. I just walked to my car in silence, sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and stared straight ahead. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't tell if I wanted to cry or scream or throw something. You know what I did instead? I laughed. Just this tiny, cracked laugh that came out of nowhere. Because the absurdity of it all finally hit me. After everything, after years of giving, loving, sacrificing, I was sitting in a parking lot because my son said I was too ugly to be in a picture. That laugh came from the part of me that had been pushed too far. That laugh was a crack in the wall. And through that tiny crack, the truth started pouring in. Had a choice. That was the turning point. Not some dramatic movie scene. No music swelling, no final confrontation. Just me and that steering wheel and the quiet realization that I could either keep chasing someone else's approval, or I could turn the page. So I made a decision. I was done begging for a seat at the table I helped build. Done proving myself to someone who had forgotten where he came from. Done shrinking. Done hoping. You know what nobody tells you about decisions like that? They're not clean. They're not pretty. They hurt like hell. They rip something open inside you. Because walking away from your child, even emotionally, even just enough to protect yourself, feels like peeling off your own skin. But some wounds get infected when you leave them open too long. And I wasn't going to let this one rot me from the inside out. Letting him smile one last time. People ask what I mean when I say that. I mean I let him live in his illusion. I let him have his perfect wedding, his flawless day, his spotless photos. I didn't show up to make a scene. I didn't crash it in defiance. I let him smile. One last time. Because I knew the smile wouldn't last forever. Eventually, something cracks when the people you've silenced stop trying to be heard. And someday, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, he'll look back and see that the person who loved him the most was the one he chose to erase. That his perfect day had a shadow he couldn't see. But that's his lesson, not mine. My lesson was this. You are allowed to stop justifying your existence. You are allowed to stop performing for people who refuse to see your value. You are allowed to walk away from the people you love if staying means abandoning yourself. I'd spent so much of my life putting his happiness first. And for a long time I thought that's what love was. Selflessness. Sacrifice. I thought that if I just gave more, smiled more, shrank more, I'd finally be enough. But love that requires you to disappear is not love. It's control. It's image. It's fear. And I was done living in fear. So I chose dignity. I chose silence over begging. I chose presence over performance. Not at his wedding but in my own life. And something happened in the weeks that followed. I started hearing my own voice again. I started remembering who I was before I was Mom. I started waking up without that heavy ache in my chest. I started laughing. Not the cracked, bitter kind but the real kind. The kind that comes from knowing you finally stopped betraying yourself. Did it hurt? Of course it did. I still have moments where I think about how it could have been. I still have dreams where he takes it back. But I don't wake up hoping anymore. I wake up choosing myself. Because I realized, sometimes letting someone go isn't about anger or revenge. Sometimes it's the greatest act of love you can give. Not just to them but to yourself. After I walked away, after the dust settled and the invitations went out without my name on them, I was left with silence. And if you've ever been through a kind of grief that doesn't have a funeral, you know how loud that silence can be. First it felt like failure. Like all those years I poured into raising him had disappeared overnight. I had flashes of memories. His first steps, the times he curled up next to me when he was scared, the nights I stayed awake while he slept, just watching his chest rise and fall. All of that lived inside me, and now I had to carry it alone. Because the person I gave it to had decided I wasn't fit to stand beside him on one of the biggest days of his life. And I was supposed to just accept that. There were days I questioned everything. Maybe I had made mistakes. Maybe I was too soft. Maybe I should have been tougher, prettier, quieter, less demanding. That's the dangerous thing about rejection. It turns your own mind against you if you let it. And trust me, I let it. I spiraled. I replayed our conversations, our fights, even the way I'd looked in the mirror that day. I wondered if, deep down, I really was the problem. But then something unexpected happened. The longer I sat with that silence, the more it stopped sounding like punishment. And it started sounding like peace. Because when you're constantly wrapped up in trying to be enough for someone else, trying to mold yourself into what they need, what they expect, what won't embarrass them, you forget who you were before they needed you. You forget that your value isn't dependent on being chosen. I had spent so much of my life in service to others, especially to my son, that I had lost sight of the woman underneath the title. Not Mom. Just me. Letting go didn't just mean stepping away from the relationship. It meant stepping back into myself. And it wasn't easy. There's this myth that healing looks like spa days and yoga and suddenly being enlightened. That's not how it went for me. Healing looked like crying in the shower. It looked like sitting alone in restaurants and wondering if people were staring. It looked like leaving the TV off because the silence felt more honest than the noise. But it also looked like sleeping through the night for the first time in years. It looked like picking up old hobbies I thought I'd lost forever. It looked like wearing lipstick again, not for anyone else but because I felt like it. It looked like walking into a room without bracing for judgment. The power of letting go wasn't just in releasing him. It was in reclaiming me. I'd held on for so long to this idea of what a mother is supposed to be. We're told to be nurturing, forgiving, selfless to the point of invisibility. We're told to love no matter what, and to accept whatever crumbs we're given in return. But that's not love. That's martyrdom. And I didn't want to be a martyr anymore. I wanted to be a whole person again. So yes, I let him smile one last time. I let him have that moment, That version of reality where I didn't exist. But after that, I let me smile again too. Not the forced, polite smile. Not the smile you wear when you're trying not to cry. The real one. The one that creeps in when you're standing in the sun, or laughing at something stupid, or sitting across from someone who actually sees you. And here's the truth. He may never apologize. He may never see what he did. He may never feel the weight of what was lost when he cut me out. But I'm not waiting for that anymore. I'm not holding my breath for an apology that might never come. Because I am not defined by his choices. I am not a side character in someone else's story. And I may have been left out of the picture, but I am finally back in my own. Healing is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. There's no sign that says, "Congratulations, you're whole again." It just kind of sneaks in, quietly, slowly, like sunlight through a window you forgot you opened. And you don't even realize it's happening until one day you react differently. You breathe a little deeper. You stop rehearsing old arguments in your head. You stop shrinking every time someone disapproves of you. You stop looking back. I didn't think I'd get to this point, to be honest. I thought that moment, standing there, hearing my son say I was too ugly for his wedding, was going to be a scar I'd carry forever. And maybe it still is, but it doesn't sting the way it used to. It's just a part of me now. It's not the whole story. That's what healing is. It's not erasing the pain. It's not pretending it didn't happen. It's learning how to live with the truth without letting it define you. For a while I did what we all do. I kept replaying it, trying to find the version where I could have done something different. The version where I dressed better, lost the weight, smiled more, said less. The version where I was just easier to love. And then one day I looked in the mirror and thought, what if this isn't about changing me at all? What if the real work is in accepting that I am already enough? Flawed, aging, complicated, and worthy anyway. And that's when everything shifted. I started talking to myself differently. I started letting go of the shame that didn't even belong to me. I started grieving, not just the loss of my son's presence, but the years I spent trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. I grieved the silence I kept when I should have spoken up. I grieved the boundaries I never learned to set. But I also started feeling grateful for the pain, yes, even that. 'Cause it woke me up. That pain cracked me open, and through that crack, I finally found my own voice again. Not the voice that had been filtered to be acceptable. Not the voice that always made sure to keep the peace. The real one. The raw, honest, powerful voice that had been buried underneath decades of putting everyone else first. And I started using it. I spoke up. I set boundaries. I said no without guilt. I started showing up in rooms as myself, not as someone else's version of who I should be. And every time I did, I felt a little freer. You know, people talk about healing like it's a solo act. But it's not. Healing is relational. It's found in connection, in choosing the right people, in surrounding yourself with voices that remind you who you are, not who you've been told to be. Found new people. Friends who didn't flinch at the messy parts. Women who held space for my pain without trying to fix it. People who reminded me that I'm not alone in this, that we've all been dismissed, hurt, diminished by someone we once loved too much. And that's the thing. Healing teaches you to love without losing yourself. It teaches you to see rejection not as a reflection of your worth, but as redirection. It teaches you that peace is better than being included in a place where you're only tolerated. And it teaches you that the most powerful thing you can do is to keep going anyway. To keep living. To keep loving. To keep being exactly who you are, even when it makes other people uncomfortable. There's no perfect ending to this story. My son still hasn't called. There hasn't been a dramatic reconciliation or teary-eyed apology. And that's okay. Healing doesn't need a neat conclusion. Just needs truth. Needs movement. It needs you to stop waiting and start choosing yourself. So I did. Chose me. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally started loving myself. I used to think the greatest thing I ever did was raise a child. But now I know. The greatest thing I've ever done was decide to rise even after he tried to erase me. And I don't need a wedding photo to prove that I was here. I'm living proof.